And it's supposed to be just like that, a conversation where we, the network, sit down together and chat about pertinent ministry topics. So I hope you have your coffee ready. And we are excited to hear about Enuma and her latest project called Reluctant Pilgrim. Welcome. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Before we get started and dive into the conversation about your book, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and maybe the work that you're involved in when you're not writing books.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I do want to say in advance, though, that I have to apologize if my dog goes off in the background. But I'm just going to pretend we're in a coffee shop and dogs bark all the time.
Perfect.
A little bit about myself. Well, as those of you who've read my book can tell, I have lived, oh my, whenever people ask me where I'm from, I always say, well, the city I live in, because I was raised in a couple of different countries on a couple of different continents. But I currently live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I've been here, I think, long enough to say that this is where I'm from for now. I am a writer and a retreat leader and a speaker. I actually came to Raleigh because I went to Duke Divinity School and got my master's in divinity there and just ended up staying in the area. But I'm very excited to be with you guys today and to answer any of your questions or to field questions that come in from the listening audience. What do I do when I'm not writing? Oh my word. Sleep. When I'm not writing, I do yoga. I do a lot of yoga. I'm actually training to be a spiritual director, so that's a pretty intense program. So I do spiritual direction, and I do a lot of speaking actually and leading retreats and workshops on faith and the arts. The visual arts as well as the literary arts is a passion of mine, and I speak a lot about how that intersects with our spiritual lives. So that's what I do. And I visit with my friends, and I walk, and I love to drink coffee and watch movies and all the sort of normal things we all do.
Fantastic. For those who haven't read your book, maybe just tell us a little bit of backstory about, you mentioned that you say that you're from the city that you're living in, but can you tell us a little bit about growing up in Nigeria and a little bit of our backstory so that those who haven't had the opportunity to read the book yet, they can know just a little bit more about you?
Sure. I would probably say I grew up equal parts in West Africa, England, the States, and then spent a bit of time in Tunisia and Bolivia. But the book sort of came out of my own, put it this way, I was raised in the Catholic Church, but for most of my life that I can remember, I've sort of had this fascination with God. And as I grew older and could understand things a bit more clearly, I realized that I didn't just have a fascination with God, I actually was in love with God. And that sort of, I think my life has always been, I feel as though I've always been strung along in a good way by the divine. And I've always been fascinated with questions of the holy, with scripture, with how God works in our lives, and eventually that led me to divinity school. But I think the book came out of the, what's the word, the discrepancy I felt with being in love with God and not feeling like I had any real sense of what church community was supposed to look like, and not feeling as though the communities I'd been a part of were anything that compelled me to stay. So I really began to struggle with what it meant to be a disciple of Christ and to be called to ecclesial community, and how to make sense of the difficulty that we sometimes have, I guess, both discovering and being discovered within the church. So the book was very much a personal journey about what that looked like for me.
Yeah. I love that, the authentic nature of your book, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, but you talk about your quest to sort of reconcile community with church. And so your intention of the book, you just touched on it just a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us maybe what you were hoping that people could glean from your story. What was sort of your hope in writing this memoir?
I think the biggest thing was that people would get a sense of, like you said, my authenticity, but just the genuineness with which one can both long after God and struggle at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's room, I believe that there's room for that struggle on the road towards God, and that God meets us there, and sort of pilgrims with us. So my hope was that a couple of things: people would read the book and come to the understanding that you can long for God and struggle with God at the same time, and that it would also encourage people to be honest with themselves and within their own communities about what their real relationships are like, both with God on a personal level and communally, with the church as a whole. So I guess I wanted it to just sort of start conversations. But I also have to say, Danica, that the truth is, when I was writing the book, I wasn't necessarily thinking, what do I want people to get from this? I was really just telling my story in ways that I felt I had to tell it, but I had to be honest with myself before I could do other things. It actually wasn't the book I was contracted to write, but when I started writing the book I was originally contracted to write, I couldn't do it because I had this other sort of big question just looming in me about the things we've talked about, and that's how Reluctant Pilgrim came to be.
Interesting, and I love that. For those of you who haven't read it, it's a must read. I love how you talk about God's persistent presence in the most unlikely places, and just it's deeply engaging in the way that you talk just about life and how you've become aware and become able to notice God in the most unlikely places. One thing that I totally love, and one of my favorite lines is you said something about if you were to talk to Jesus, that he might tell you to quit talking during the prayers and stop calling him the J unit. And I just absolutely love this sort of, I don't know, I've just sort of made this up, but irreverent holiness. This way that you have of talking about God in the most real and down-to-earth ways that I think some people are maybe even afraid to talk about or to God in those ways. Can you say more about this sort of journey to being real with God too? I mean, I think sometimes in our prayer and in our language and things like that, especially as people in ministry, we forget that we can be real and we should be real with God too.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I don't know if I can pinpoint a time when I felt it was okay to talk to God a certain way. I think because like I said, I've always been fascinated by God and eventually sort of fell in love with God, that for as long as I can remember, I've always really seen it as a real relationship. I've always understood it the way I understand human relationships I'm involved in. And I've always thought, and I think because I've always thought, people often say, well, God knows your heart, but then they usually follow that up with, so why bother telling him anything? And the way I look at it is, well, God knows your heart, so shoot, why can't I say anything? If I don't say it, he'll know it anyway. So I think that's where that comes from. And part of I like how you call it irreverent holiness, is actually kind of just my personality. The book is also about having a deep love of God, but also being deeply entrenched in the world and being able to acknowledge that. Because I am one of those Christians who, I do love the world, and I love a lot of the things about being in the world, and I don't make a separation between heaven and earth as much as maybe I could. But at the same time, I do realize that we're called to be in this world but not of it. But I also think that there's lots of beauty, and I think God has a sense of humor. And so I think because of what I imagine God is like, it gives me more room to just be myself and give thanks that this is the way that God has made me. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. It's very freeing. It's a really creative and freeing perspective for me, even to think about. And I hope you've gotten feedback, similar feedback from other people. I'm wondering if the theme of friendships and how you talk about God must have had slumber parties, because you say that some of your most sincere experiences of God are channeled through your gal pals. I'm totally there with you. I feel the exact same way, that my gal pals are the way that I experience God most often. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about some feedback that you might have gotten from a male audience.
Yeah, you know, when I was writing this book, again, I wasn't necessarily thinking of the audience in any way, really. But after I wrote it, and when I read it a couple of times, I thought, I wonder if this will be most attractive to women or to young girls. But I wasn't necessarily too worried about it. I just thought I could see how some people might see it as sort of a gear towards women. But I have been really grateful for the men who have taken the time to respond to me, and I've been really surprised by the range, the age range, from folks in their early 20s to men probably in their 40s and 50s, who've not only emailed, but when I've had public readings, who have come up to me afterwards and shared with me how much the book meant to them and how much they were able to find themselves within it. And so what I think about that is, even though Enuma's own experience has been deeply marked by these amazing grace-filled friendships, that the larger story itself is about a hunger for God and how the ways in which we seek to find that and where we seek to locate God. And I think that that bigger story can resonate with anyone, whether you're male or female. So the particulars of my book are I guess central to my life experience. But the bigger issues, for example, within those friendships is, where do you feel like you belong? Where do you feel like you are invited into spaces of not only knowing others, but being known? Where does it feel safe for you to be vulnerable? Where are you invited to catch, like you said, to catch glimpses of God in the most ordinary spaces? So I think that men can identify with those longings, even if some or most have not experienced it the way that women usually do in friendship. I actually had a male reader tell me how much he loved the book, and he said that, Enuma, I have to tell you, reading the parts about your girlfriends and your friendships, it really made me ask myself, where do I get that? What are the spaces, where are the spaces in my life where I can find that sort of community? And I thought that was really bold and striking of him to think of it that way.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the age range of some feedback that you've gotten. And as I was reading, I was thinking about not only the people who are on this call, people who are in ministry with young people and young adults, but the book seemingly being about, or to, a generation of seekers, those who are younger, and wondering sort of what feedback have you gotten as this book has been read by many. Is it a cross-generational message, and how does it preach or talk to a congregation or a church of older people, builders of the church?
I think overall I would say it is a cross-generational message, because regardless of our age, our spiritual journeys don't always coincide with how old we are. I've met some wise 18-year-olds who are very wise spiritually, and I've met some people in their 40s who I feel like, do you remember that you were baptized? So I think that's how the most, I guess, blatant way I would address that question. But as far as reader responses, it has run the gamut from 18-year-olds who have read this and emailed me to men and women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who have emailed me or come up to me after readings just expressing how much, they felt finally hearing something aloud, hearing many things aloud that they have always wanted to say aloud or could never even find the words to express. And kind of like you said, I've been really surprised by how many people have approached me just to say that this book was sort of freeing for them. Because not only did they catch on to the real questions and doubts and confessions, but they also, by God's grace, caught on to the fact that there is a real love of God here, and it's not just about a cradle Christian waxing poetic. It's about someone I hope it's about someone who's really seeking to live authentically while acknowledging that she herself is fragmented and broken and has desires that aren't always of God, but recognizes that we're always called to walk towards God. So it definitely has spoken across the age range.
I love that. That's great. I have another question for myself, but I just wanted to remind people that as you're listening in, you can plug into the chat box that's on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type in your questions, and I will pass them along for further conversation. We're just about halfway through, and so I wanted to make sure that I reminded people, because I forgot to at the beginning, that we want you to be able to be in conversation with Enuma as well. And so go ahead and you can type in your questions, and I will get those across. My last question, right now, of course, I would love to pick your brain about all things Reluctant Pilgrim, and but I really love the way that you engage and talk really openly and frankly about some of the hard moments in your friends' lives, and how those experiences just seep authenticity. And I'm thinking mostly about the night that you talk about shaving your friend Claire's head.
Yeah.
And you described it as sacred and ordinary holy ground. What is it that authentic community combines this sacred and ordinary to create holy ground? That maybe unpack a little bit about what you mean when you talk about the sacred and ordinary to create holy ground.
Holy ground. That's a very good question. I think a couple of things. I'm going to think through this aloud.
Sure.
I think for me, being able to recognize, say for example, that experience of shaving Claire's head, my girlfriend who had cancer, and recognized her hair was falling out, and I and another girlfriend went over to her house and shaved her head for her. And I think recognizing that what we were doing is so, it's like almost recognizing the deep sorrow in why we were there that night and what we had to do, but also this deep sense of joy and gratitude for being able to do that for one another. And it's, cancer is not new. There are a gazillion people who have gone through devastating illnesses and just devastating life experiences. So that is very much part of living in a broken world. But I think seeing the holiness in something that is ordinary, like cancer, is that even though many people can relate to having the experience of dealing with that sort of dealing with difficult and hard illness, it is holy because it's still unique to Claire, and it's unique to her community who have to walk with her in that, and how Claire handles that devastation in her life is unique to her. And so the holiness is finding God in the holiness is finding that God takes residence and sort of squats in your pain as much as in anyone else's, or as much. I always think about how, how we always think, oh, I shouldn't be complaining because so many other people have it so much worse than I do. I could be, starving in Ethiopia, or I could be, and I think I always sort of like to balance that with the fact that, but because of God's amazing goodness and love for us, even though in our minds what is happening to other people, of course, is devastating and things could always be worse, God still honors the crap that happens with us. Like God still honors the particulars of our own, of individual lives.
Uh-huh.
And so to me, the holy is, like I said, just finding the spaces where God wants us to let him squat. The places where we may think, oh, what would God want to do here? Or even in the case of real devastation and hurt, what could God do here? And that we find that in just the very simple ways we are present to one another. And I think our presence to one another in Christ is kind of, it lifts us up in hope, more so than if we, of course we're not meant to do life alone. We're not meant to do discipleship alone. And I just always think of, I have this image of when my own father died, and I talk about this in the book, I lost my own ability to pray, and I had nothing to give to God. Not that I didn't want to, I just had nothing. I always had this image of, like at rock concerts where your body slammed, your body carried up to the, to the stage. I always had this image of being sort of body slammed, carried up to the altar. And those were my prayers, that all my community who lifted up their hands in prayer for me when I didn't have any words, they were carrying me up to God's stage. And that would, yeah.
Wow, what a cool image.
There you go.
Yeah, I love it.
I don't know if that helps.
Good. Well, thanks for sharing that. I have a question coming in from Kristen Beltram. Her quote is, earlier you said something about discovering and being discovered in and by the church, or something like that, she says.
Yep, that's what I said.
What do you think are the ways that we, the church professional, can help our communities name the gifts that are within our people?
Yeah, that's actually, when I said that's exactly what I was thinking of being discovered. I think one of the things I'm most grateful for in the church home I am currently in, which I found towards the end of writing Reluctant Pilgrim, which is why Reluctant Pilgrim ends on a positive note, is that within this church I've really felt a sense that it's not that the, I hate to use the word success, put it this way, the thriving life of the church community is not dependent on the pastor, it's dependent on we who sit in the seats, because all of our gifts are not only all of our gifts are needed, but we're constantly reminded that we are all gifted in particular ways. And I really love the ways in which, and this happens in many ways, it doesn't just happen by taking a spiritual gifts inventory, though that is part of it, that definitely was part of it in this congregation, but it also happens in how our pastor preaches and his continual invitations for us to find our unique places within our church community where we feel our gifts can best be used. So there's a constant reminder through the liturgy, through things we're invited to beyond Sunday morning, that remind us that the life of the church is dependent on our finding our gifts, naming them, and using them, both within the church doors and outside in the broader community. And what part of what comes with that is a real challenge to me as a pew sitter to not just feel like I can walk into the church and then leave when I've taken the Eucharist. You know that there's that community, the pastoral team and the community have expectations of me. And no matter how I might struggle with my own selfish tendencies to sort of own my own time, there's still something very affirming and very beautiful and very inviting about knowing that there are people who hold you to certain standards and have expectations about you. I have expectations from you within a spiritual community. So that's one way.
Great. Thank you. A question coming in here. Wondering if you can teach tease us a bit about what you'll be talking about at the extravaganza this weekend?
I'll be talking about rest. I will be talking about, I think, how to honor the spaces of rest that God calls us to, and the importance of Sabbath. But all of that will be wrapped into an importance of trying to think about our lives as a liturgy in and of themselves, and sort of mirroring what we see in liturgy, that there are spaces for all sorts of things. There are spaces for prayers, and there's spaces for singing, and there's space for rest, and there's space for quiet. There's space for baptism. There's space for so many things in the liturgy we enact on Sundays, most of us on Sundays, that I really think there's something to trying to live our lives liturgically, even as we look at the liturgy as sort of a metaphor for how we live our own daily lives. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you'll engage us in more of your story, so that for those who haven't had the chance to read it yet, like I keep saying yet, that they'll get to sort of have a little bit of a window into your heart and what makes this whole reluctant pilgrim thing come alive.
Thank you.
A little funny question here. When will Reluctant Pilgrim be available on Kindle?
Oh, that's so funny. I keep getting that. I have no idea, but you know what? Every time I get a plug, I throw it at my publisher. So as soon as I'm done here, I will send an email.
Okay.
So I don't know, but hopefully soon. Yeah, I'm grateful that people want to read it on Kindle. I'm so old school. I love to hold a book in my hand and to bend the pages and the aesthetics of books and all of that stuff. But
I'm with you on that one. I like to write and scribble and
yes,
all that kind of stuff.
I will move towards the future. So, yeah. But thank you for asking that.
I don't know that I have a question about you talk about your love for crucifixes and your collection of crucifixes, but I'm not sure that we can maybe give it adequate time. So maybe if you could just give a 2-minute little window into that. I thought that was a really significant piece about buying crucifixes in Nigeria before you left to come to America.
Yeah, I think the simple thing behind that is just I'm just very aesthetically motivated, and I've always been that way. And as a child, being raised in the Catholic Church, I mean, it was an aesthetic playground. And so, between the stained glass and the life-size statues of Christ and Mary, and I think as a kid, I was just awed by, these little images of God, that you found on pendants you could wear around your neck, like the little Christ and the little Mary on the rosary, and I was just fascinated by that. But I can't tell you why I felt so moved to collect them. I think that's part of just the Spirit's own way of working in me uniquely. But a lot of it was about aesthetics as well, and just being a childish fascination with, oh, there's God up there, and this is the God we talk about who takes up the church. Oh my gosh, and here he is in this tiny miniature version, So.
Cool. Great. Well, it's almost time for us to wrap up. So I'm just going to make a little plug. This coming weekend is the extravaganza in Kansas City, and we're so excited that you'll be joining us as a main stage speaker. And hopefully you'll be able to take some time to sign books and answer questions and all things like that. During this webinar, you've had the opportunity to see the covers of Enuma's 2 books, Reluctant Pilgrim, which we've been talking about today. She also has a new book coming out called Common Prayer, A Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals, with a few co-authors. And so I just want to send out the invite to check both of those out. You won't be disappointed. And if you'd like more information about Enuma, you can check out these books or find more information at enumaokoro.com, which has also been listed on your screen. And we just are so thrilled that you joined us this week on our 3TC, and that we'll be able to hear more from you this coming weekend. Our next Third Tuesday conversation is February 15th, and our special guest is Raleigh Martinson, and he'll be talking a bit about the Exemplar Youth Ministry Study and his work with that. So I want to thank you again, Enuma, for joining us today, and thank everyone for listening in on our Third Tuesday conversation. It's been a great half hour. Thanks so much, Enuma.
Thank you, guys.
We'll see you this weekend. Take care.
Okay, bye.